There's a skinwalker in my neighborhood. I had heard of skinwalkers before, but always just assumed they were the Native American version of werewolves, so I never gave them much thought. Until last week, when one of the co-workers at my new job told me that they were his most feared folklore creatures. He's originally from Utah, so that makes sense. He suggested some YouTube videos to watch on the subject, and after work that night, I binged about 4 or 5 of the videos. I totally understand his stance on them now. I live in rural South Carolina, so to be completely honest, I wasn't too worried about the possibility of running into one. My coworker told me that they're basically a Midwestern thing. I'd be more worried about Wendigos if I were you. He joked the day after I watched the videos. We had a good chat about skinwalkers and Wendigos during our shift and just reveled in the creepiness of them. I mentioned how one of the tales said that the more you talk about skinwalkers, the more they're drawn to you. And he made sarcastic ghost noises to keep the mood light. That night, I showed the videos to my fiancée. She was way more creeped out than I was. I became kind of obsessed. I love scary things and couldn't help but watch every video I came across. I discussed skinwalkers with my other horror enthusiast friends, looked up skinwalker art, read true skinwalker stories on Reddit, just dove headfirst into all things skinwalker. This went on for a few days until I started feeling a little burned out. On the subject, I live in a fairly nice neighborhood where all the houses are on one side of the street. On the other side is property that used to belong to the local elementary school. The building is on the next street over. So basically, it was like the school's backyard or whatever. The school shut down about 30 or 40 years ago, and the county just let nature reclaim the. So, directly across from my house is an old chain link fence and just overgrown woods. 2 nights ago, while I was smoking a cigarette, I heard leaves rustling across the street. I didn't bother looking up from my phone. I live across from woods. It was probably a deer. The rustling stopped, then started again, and it sounded like whatever was over there was running back and forth along the fence line, panting like a dog. This caught my attention. There had been a few rabies cases in my town 2 months back, so a strange dog running around in the middle of the night was definitely something I'd want to keep an eye on. I look up from my phone in the direction of the sounds, and they just stop. It was like the thing knew I noticed it. I strained my eyes trying to see what it was, but it was obscured by the overgrowth. I didn't look away, must have stared at the spot for at least a minute. It didn't make another sound, didn't move again, so I knew it was still there. A chill ran down my spine, and I began thinking of every skinwalker video I had watched over the last week, and I felt sick to my stomach. I quickly put out my cigarette and went inside. The next morning, I took my dog out for a short walk. She's a pug zoo named Honey and is like my child. Me and my fiancé taught her that pee-pee poo-poo means it's time to go outside to potty. It's the cutest thing. Anyway, this particular morning, I take her out to the front yard to do her business. She pees and then walks around sniffing for about 5 minutes before walking to the side of the street and sitting down. She's never done this before, so I was a little annoyed. I tugged on her leash lightly and tried to coax her back toward the house. "Come on, honey. Gotta poo-poo." She didn't budge. This dog could be stubborn sometimes, but this was something else. She tugged back against the leash and just stared across the street, sniffing the air occasionally. It was then that I realized she was staring at the exact spot that I heard the thing the night before. I got goosebumps, and I quickly picked her up and began walking back to the house. As I got closer, I noticed something on the ground by my front steps. It was one of the Halloween decorations my fiancé had hung up on our house. Plastic black roses with plastic eyeballs and spiders on them. The stems were wire, so they can be wrapped around things to keep them secured. This flower was torn apart. Something had come onto my porch, taken down the flower, and torn it apart, leaving it lying in front of my steps. I picked up the flower and threw it away. I didn't tell my fiancé. I didn't want her freaking out. The rest of that day went by uneventfully. That night, I told my coworker about what happened, and he looked a little concerned, but brushed it off. Said what I heard was most likely just a dog, and the flower was probably knocked down by the wind. I had my doubts. As I was walking to my door after getting home from work last night, I heard that same panting as the night before and the clicking of claws against asphalt. I turned quickly to see a dog that looked like a brown, mangy bull terrier hauling ass down my street. The street is probably about 40 feet away from my front porch, so I couldn't get a great look at it. But I could tell it was only running on 3 legs, because one looked mangled. It turned quickly and darted into the tree line across the street through a part of the fence that had been pulled back. The fence wasn't like that earlier that day. That's when I noticed that the dog didn't have a tail. I almost threw up. Skinwalker legends say that when they take the form of an animal, they never have tails. I tried to rationalize it to myself. Maybe it just had a stub tail that I missed, because it was running. I immediately went inside. My fiancée was sitting on the couch petting Honey. She could see I was upset and asked me what was wrong. I told her nothing, just almost got clipped by a car before I pulled into the driveway. She got up, hugged me, and cursed the person that almost hit me. She asked me if I could take Honey out for pee-pee poo-poo, because she had been creeped out by all the spooky videos we've been watching and didn't feel comfortable going outside at night by herself. Honey perked up. She ran to the door and looked between me and the door, whining excitedly. I stared down at her for a moment before agreeing to it. I'll just keep her close to the porch, I thought. We walked off the porch, and she immediately tried to walk to the street. I tugged on the leash, and she tugged back. She eventually moseyed to the edge of the porch and peed. After, she began walking around sniffing. I told her the usual line, "Come on, honey, gotta poo-poo." She huffed at me, sniffed around some more, and eventually started pooping. I was on edge the entire time we were outside, but being around her helped calm me down a little. Then I heard it from across the street. "Come on, honey." My voice, in the exact same tone and inflection as I had just said it. It sounded staticky, like an old radio broadcast, but it was definitely my voice. Honey stopped what she was doing and stood alert. She looked over to me and cocked her head. "Come on, honey. Got to poo-poo." Again, my voice called from across the street. Honey began whining, looking from me to the woods across the street. I picked her up and began backing up to the steps, not taking my eyes off the part of the fence that had been pulled back. "Honey, come!" The voice sounded firm now, like it was getting aggravated. Honey squirmed in my arms, whining. I didn't know if she was trying to get out to go to the voice or to run inside, but I wasn't taking any chances. I turned and bolted up the steps and to the door. As I walked inside, I turned one last time to look across the street. There, standing in the part of the fence that was pulled back, was the dog. Its eyes were glowing a dull orange, and it had its teeth bared. The face was all wrong, like someone had taken a distortion tool and just dragged around random features. Once again, I didn't tell my fiancée. Stupid horror movie cliché shit, I know. But I really don't want her losing her shit. I just told her there's a strange dog running around the neighborhood, so to not take Honey out at night. Later last night, after we had gone to bed, I woke up to the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth outside my window. Against my better judgment, I rolled over to try and see it. I don't, but the pacing stops. "Come on, honey!" My voice called out, cutting through the quiet of the night. I prayed my fiancé didn't hear. It called out 2 more times before I heard it walking away. I didn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. Today when I get to work, I'm going to ask my coworker what I can do to get rid of this thing. I'm scared. I don't think there's a way. If anyone knows anything, please let me know. Smiling Skinwalker. I've had a draft of this story set up for a while, but I've been too worried and scared to tell. It made me question everything: my faith, my eyes, my sanity. I've decided it's time to finally let others know about what I've experienced, as it may help me move on. At least, that's what I hope. I recently moved westward to Arizona from the boring state of Oklahoma. I am a devout Christian, and never once before had I believed there were entities in existence that we couldn't hunt down with our modern advancements. It's 2019, for heaven's sake. You'd figure if we wanted to find something, we would, and most of all, we could. It was the 23rd of December, 2018. I was in Payson, Arizona, a bit north of Phoenix. My friends and I, in our Christmas spirit, decided to head out north of town, about 5 to 6 miles or so, into the forest on a secluded trail. It was cold that night. Some of my friends shivered and displayed obvious signs of unpreparedness. I was layered fairly well, and yet the winds and frigid cold punctured through my layers and onto me. We wanted to make a bonfire, warm up, enjoy ourselves, and a few drinks. I knew as soon as I got into the car to head that way, something was off. I felt sick, uneasy, and something in my gut told me to just stay home. But I couldn't put my finger on just what, and ignored my ever-so looming feelings of anxiety. We picked up friends and headed to the trail. I'm a huge nature lover, and always felt safe in the confines of the forest. I felt in control, at ease. But not tonight. It may sound cliché, but I'll be damned if it didn't feel like someone or something was watching me when we finally got there. And when I had gotten far enough down the trail that turning back would be no hasty endeavor, it finally hit me why I felt so eerie. That same year, during the weeks prior to Thanksgiving, I was here before. It's not a spot we usually go to, therefore I was not familiar with it, nor were my friends. We were coming out for the same reason. We were in December, for a few drinks around a bonfire. It was late. I, however, hadn't had any spirits that night. It was my job to gather firewood. I didn't mind. My chance to survey and explore the area around us wouldn't be bad. Before I even left our area, things took a turn for the strange. I was at the edge of the light being cast from the small bonfire I was to gather more fuel for. In the faint glow of the far trees, I caught a glimpse of something dart behind a tall pine. I asked my friends if it was out of the ordinary for people to be hanging around this spot. My query was only met with silence from them as they drank on. I took a few more steps beyond the comfort of the blaze, keeping my eyes affixed on the tall, shadowy figure fixated behind the tall trees. I could faintly make out that it had moved in a slight bobbing motion, like a buoy upon a tide. My immediate thoughts drew a blank as to why someone would be out here doing this. Maybe I was seeing things, or it was a prank of some sort. I opened my mouth to call out, or even crack a joke, but was mortified when I realized I could not speak. Something inside of me prevented me of making any noise. My heart raced. As it swiftly came, it shot off into the distance like a bullet. Being startled so badly, I fell back onto the ground and kicked myself back like a spooked animal, scratching and cutting my hands as I do so. My friends saw me and laughed, thinking I was drunk. I managed to stammer out a line to what I saw, but was only met with a few blank stares and laughs, making me sound stupid. For the rest of the night, I never dared step away from the beams of the bonfire. As I walked down that trail that frigid December evening, I remember what I had seen and felt on that cold November night, and my stomach dropped. My friends were slurring out Christmas carols and other drunk epiphanies. I know they wouldn't listen to me even if I spoke out. So I ignored the guttural feelings, prayed for the best, and walked on. I hadn't been drinking much this night either. I don't enjoy alcohol as much as my friends, and often I was the one responsible for herding them home when the night was over. However, to calm my tense nerves, I had a drink or two from some Jaeger we had chilled in the ice chest. It was Christmas after all. It worked. We were all having a good time, enjoying our festive feelings, and generally savoring the crisp forest atmosphere. Soon, nature called, and forgetting my prior ordeal, I began to walk away from the fire to relieve myself. I walked a fair 300 or so feet away towards a big rock resting behind some fallen trees, not wanting to be seen, doing my business. I was not even far enough away from the fire to not be able to hear my friends' voices echoing through the woodlands. From behind me, my friend Corbin, who had come along, called out my name. I'll admit, I was tipsy, but nowhere near enough to not differentiate reality from a drunken stupor. I remember calling out to him, telling him to give me a moment to finish. I zipped up and turned to walk around the rock to where I heard him wonder to. I don't know what it was, but sure as all heaven above and hell below was not Corbin. It took me a minute for my woozy mind to put this together and stop walking towards it. I am thankful I did. This being stood tall, at least 6 to 7 feet. Its eyes burned like our fire. It moved from a dog-like, 4-limb position to standing tall. The light from the moon on this cold night radiated the body, showing off its dark, slender shape with an inhumane sheen. I began to sob, violently. My mind ran in panicked circles. Seconds felt like lifetimes as my world ground to a halt at the clawed feet of the beast that I was sure was going to take my life from me right then and there. I did the only thing I could think to do. I dropped to my knees and began to pray. This monster, to my petrified brain, had to have been the devil himself. To imagine him anything worse than it would be impossible. It did not like my pleas to God. An unholy shriek of what I can only think to describe as someone screaming loudly with lungs full of water rang out. I screamed in terror, and with all the strength I could muster, lunged backwards across the forest floor, running as fast as my legs could take me. I fell a few times, I think, in sheer panic. I just couldn't manage to get my body to work properly, knowing that thing was near. When I returned in a panicked craze to the fire, covered in sweat, dirt, and tears, I managed to wheeze out what happened somewhat through my sobs of fear. I could tell they doubted whether or not what I was desperately stammering out was real or not. I think I was so horrified in that moment that I had a small seizure, because everything else is a blur. I remember going to the truck, leaving. I remember waking up the next day, receiving a multitude of texts saying I was either stupid and crazy, or texts from worried friends asking if I was okay. And I also remember the last I saw of the thing before I made my frenzied flee, when it smiled back at me through the forest and skittered off into the darkness. A few days after Christmas, I was able to get in touch with a native elder here in town. I was so scared mentioning the event because I was worried of being mocked or him not believing me. To a twist of my thinking, I told him very vividly what I had encountered. He wholeheartedly believed and told me it was a skinwalker. He then blessed me thoroughly and told me to leave that stretch of land alone and to never venture out there again. Next time, I might not be so lucky. He didn't have to tell me twice. I know I sound crazy. If I were you, I wouldn't believe me either. But you don't have to. All you have to know is, for the love of God above and all things holy, never forget that we are not alone on this earth. Sometimes during the night, whenever I look out my window, I catch sight of eyes in the trees looking back at me. I will keep this thread updated. I am still horrified. The Skinwalker. I don't consider myself to be a particularly superstitious person. That is to say, I get the occasional kick out of the horoscope, and my boyfriend and I like to humor the idea that spirits and poltergeists exist. We even joke about how we'd haunt people when we died and came back as ghosts. In fact, my boyfriend refuses to go anywhere near a Ouija board, refuses to even think of it. Why even tempt it, he'd say. Why would you want to taunt evil ghosts like that? Ghosts never play fair, and if you piss one off, you're screwed. I don't think he was ever serious, just precautionary. But maybe he was right. God, this all happened so recently. I'm still shaken. Can barely write about it now without my nerves acting up. Okay, here it goes. A few weeks ago, my mom, sister, and I went to Colorado for an entire week of vacation. We were going to drive all over the state, visit the national parks, and go horseback riding and whitewater rafting and so much more. I was excited, and I sorely needed a break from work anyway. We drove a grueling 16 hours out there and spent our first day rafting down the rivers. After an extremely wet but exhilarating day, we drove to a ranch house to go horseback riding. We arrived at sunset, so it was too late to do anything, but we had all next day to ride the trails and see the sights. The ranch was dumpy, to put it nicely. It was all run down with scraps of steel everywhere, and the shoddy lodging cabins were in desperate need for repair. I swear the roof over our shack of a cabin was a giant piece of drywall with shingles stapled to the top. My sister and I thoroughly checked the place for spiders and bugs before we even thought of bringing our luggage inside. It was only for the night, I reassured myself. Just one night in a dumpy shack on a rock-hard bed that probably had bed bugs under the sheets. I shuddered at the thought. My mom tried to cheer us up. She had brought skewers and a pack of hot dogs to roast over the communal fire pit. Happy to get out of the shack, my sister and I made a nice cozy fire, and soon a few other visitors came out to sit around the fire and roast s'mores and share stories. We talked about where we were from, where we were going, and all our adventures along the way. Pretty soon the stories turned into tall tales and urban legends and the sort of stuff you'd usually tell around a bonfire. That's when I spoke up. I loved stories, especially scary ones. And hey, we're out west. We're in Native American territory. Why not liven the place up with my favorite local myth, the legend of the Skinwalkers? Now, for the uninitiated, Skinwalkers are very evil, very dangerous beings. They were humans who gained the ability to take on the form of an animal by wearing its pelt, usually through very dark and taboo magic. I knew all this and told my story. Who doesn't love a good ghost story after all? Everyone seemed to be enjoying it. I admit I took some creative liberties, really just retold an old werewolf story, but with a skinwalker as the monster instead. I improvised a lot of the story and added a few things that weren't in the mythos at all. I gave our beloved frightening skinwalker wide, crazed eyes with pinpoints for pupils, with a matching, insane smile. I made the skinwalker horribly misshapen, swollen joints, and arms that were too long and legs that were too short, and a head that never sat straight on its shoulders. I made it as terrifying as I could imagine. No one minded. They actually really liked it. A man from Kentucky admitted the visuals alone were enough to creep him out. Victory in my book, if you ask me. And once I was done, everyone decided it was getting really late. Our firewood was dwindling, and it was as good a time as any to turn in for the night. We packed up our skewers and s'mores, doused the fire, and headed to our little shacks. I tossed and turned a lot trying to fall asleep. I couldn't get comfortable on that damn bed. A rock was probably cozier than that mattress. So against my better judgment, I got out of bed and walked about the cabin. I reasoned that if I stayed up late enough, I would be so tired that I would fall asleep no matter what I was laying on. I think I briefly contemplated sleeping on the floor. I wasn't that desperate yet. It was pitch black outside. No lights from any nearby street lamps, no car headlights. Hell, not even the cabin lights were on. And I don't remember seeing a single star. It was a bit creepy, but I shrugged off the shiver creeping up my back as simply the cold tile floor beneath my feet. I did, however, find it odd there weren't any lights on at all on the property. You'd think there'd be a floodlight on the horse stables or in the main office, but no, nothing. That was really weird. I stepped outside in my flimsy, foam flip-flops to get a better look. I could barely make out the ranch, and for some stupid reason, I decided to go walking around. Eventually, my eyes adjusted where I could see well enough to navigate. I paced up and down the road where the cabin sat, and then circled around to the fenced-in field where the horses were out grazing. Except there weren't any horses. Probably in the stables for the night, I reasoned. I shivered again. It was getting cold. I turned around to head back to my own cabin. It was stupid of me to be out all alone at an obscene hour, I had realized. I needed to get to bed. But when I turned, there was something in the middle of the road. Its shape was swallowed up by the surrounding darkness. I could barely make it out. But whatever it was tall and thin. I shrugged it off as just a pole or something else and kept walking. But then it moved. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I could barely breathe. I just imagined that, I said. I just imagined it. I'm freaking myself out. Get your fucking head straight. It moved again. My paralyzed throat managed to squeak out a pathetically weak whimper as my legs began to lose strength. I shivered violently against a cold that was building up inside of me. My eyes began to focus on the impossibly dark figure standing against a barely visible sleet gray night. Now, I could see it. It was Dot. It was a person, but like nothing I had ever seen before. Its arms were impossibly long, its legs impossibly short. It had a torso far too long for its rail-thin body, and a head much too big for its pencil-thin neck. Its right arm was sticking out to its side, swinging up and down. Its blockish head rolled onto its left shoulder, jerkily twitched up and down, up and down. It didn't move other than that, just stood there, twitching, arms jerking up and down, head lolling around its shoulder. I still stood there like the dumb fuck I was. My cabin was a few hundred yards behind that thing. And I wasn't so stupid as to try to walk past it. My only option was to go around behind the cabins and the stables and hope it didn't see me. I forced myself to lift my foot off the ground to step backwards. My flip-flop made a loud, wet, smacking sound as it cracked against my foot, and I immediately froze in horror. The thing stopped too. It stood there, perfectly straight, perfectly still, listening. I stayed as still as I could. My breath was shallow and panicked, and I tried to force myself to slow my breathing before I started wheezing. My heart thundered in my chest. My whole body was shaking. But I didn't move. Neither did it. I began to slowly, goddamn slowly, bend over and slipped my feet out of those fucking flip-flops. My feet touched the dirt and the crumbly gravel, but at least now I could move silently. I spared a quick glance to the side to see where I was going. 2 cabins were immediately to my right. I could slip between them with ease, disappear out of sight. I only looked away for a second. When I turned back, that fucking thing was gone. It was fucking gone. It fucking knew I was there. It was coming for me. Oh, fuck. Yet I still couldn't fucking move. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move no matter how loud my head screamed. Run, 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 you fuck. Run! I heard something behind me. I turned instinctively, even though I knew fucking better. I still turned the fuck around. I was greeted with 2 bulging eyes. Oh fuck, its eyes. Staring at me unblinking with 2 black pinholes for pupils and an insane smile that was stretched far too wide to be anything remotely human. My paralysis broke as I stared at that fucking thing. I ran. I fucking ran, crying my eyes out, trying to scream, but a horrible lead weight in my throat silenced me. My feet pounded on the dirt. I stomped over anything in my way. I trampled over a jagged rock, slicing my foot wide open. I ignored the pain. I ignored my body screaming in agony. I ignored my own blood pouring from the wound. I didn't care. I just ran. I felt the cold creeping up my back. Oh God, that cold. It was sinking right into my bones. I couldn't stop shaking or sobbing, and I didn't stop running until I burst into the cabin. I slammed the door shut, dead-bolted the lock, and leaped into my bed. I huddled under the blankets, hiding my head, and there I gasped and shook for breath. And I waited. I didn't sleep that entire night. I was too scared. I couldn't get rid of that chill. All I thought about was that thing, standing there and twitching. Morning finally broke, and I finally allowed breath of relief. Whatever I had seen had not come for me, and now that it was light, it could no longer take me by surprise. My mom noticed my bleeding foot and the blood I tracked through the cabin. I shrugged it off, said I cut myself the night before when we were making s'mores. I don't think she believed me, but she didn't push it. We left not long after that, and as we left, I looked at the place where that thing once stood, and I shuddered again. But there was nothing. I assured myself, there was nothing. We said goodbye to the ranchers and to our companions, and I noticed the man from Kentucky who said had thoroughly enjoyed my story. He told me again how much he liked it, said he was going to tell it to his own kids when he got home. They really liked scary stories, he said. And as we drove away, his head rolled onto his left shoulder, and he smiled a wide, insane smile as he waved us goodbye. My Skinwalker story. Before I begin, I would like to say that this is a very long story. It's been something that's haunted me since I was 6 years old, since my first encounter with it. I have had dreams about this, and 2 very specific encounters with the creature. I'm sharing this story so I could possibly find help on what to do, or how to get rid of this creature that's been hunting me since I can remember. Just for background, I am a 21-year-old female, and still worry about this creature finding me. But I'll get into detail why later. For now, here's my story. I would always go camping with my grandparents, who I call my Gammy and Gampy, at the end of my school years. I would always look forward to it since I grew up loving the outdoors and the woods. I especially loved camping, loving the idea of having s'mores, taking long hikes, being around the campfire, and of course, the wildlife we would see. Now I grew up in California, mostly near cities, so the forest was like my true home to me. I always preferred being near trees and dirt rather than buildings and crowded places. Besides, the woods were much quieter and more peaceful. I always felt safe when I was there, like nothing could ever hurt me. But something strange would always happen at the end of the month of May. I would have this reoccurring dream during the last week of my school year. I would be in the woods, walking alone down a dirt trail. The woods were always strangely quiet. I would continue to walk this path until I saw this red fox poke its head from behind a tree. Its eyes were always strangely human-like, but they were yellow and somehow looked like teddy bear eyes. And it would just stare at me. It wouldn't make a sound at all. It would just watch me. Usually in my dream, I would go up and pet it, that making the fox finally make a noise, usually a soft growl. Then I would continue walking, and it would follow me. The first time I would have this dream was when I was actually around 5 years old, and it lasted until I was about perhaps 11. Over the years, it would be the same exact thing. I would walk in the woods, find this fox, pet it, then continue my hike with it alongside me. But about having this dream for the fourth time, it would start to walk behind me. That's when I started to feel uneasy about this fox. I can hear it making odd noises, but every time I went back to look, it was just walking like nothing was wrong, even, somehow, giving me a smile. Sorry to go one about a dream, but I now believe that it was a warning of the creature. Now that the dream is out of the way, I can talk about my first true encounter. I was 6 years old and was going on a camping trip with my Gammy and Gampy for about a week. Of course, I was very excited for it, being able to barely keep myself in my school seat for the last day of kindergarten. They had picked me up right as the bell had rung and already had the camping trailer attached to my Gampy's truck. I remember he drove an old red truck that only had 3 seats, me always being in the middle. It took about 2 hours to get there, and another good hour to find our usual camping spot. It was deep into the woods and far from other people, as my Gammy wasn't too fond of being around other people while we camped. As they were setting up the camping trailer, I wandered around the campsite, loving to dig in the dirt for bugs. I had sat down on the dirt and started to dig, but I noticed how strangely quiet the woods were. It was never quiet, not even in the dead of night. I thought it was odd, but being only 6, I didn't think too hard about it. As I continued to dig for bugs, however, I thought I heard my Gammy call for me. She would usually call me Sugar Booger, that being a nickname she gave me since I was born. That's what I had heard, but it sounded like she was very far away and somewhat sick. Sugar Booger. I looked up where I heard it come from, that being from the woods. But there was no way she was there, because she was still unloading stuff from the truck. Even at the age of 6, it didn't feel right. So I walked closer to my grandparents and stayed next to them. I soon forgot about my weird encounter, though, as we began to have fun. For the rest of that day, we played card games, sat next to the campfire as we ate dinner, and stared up into the stars. I always loved seeing the stars, there never being any where I lived at. We started to get sleepy around 9 p.m., I believe, and we started to get ready for bed. There were bunk beds that me and my Gammy would sleep on, keeping our luggage on the top bunk, and we would sleep on the bottom bunk. Due to my Gampy's snoring, he would sleep on the couch of the trailer. I would always sleep next to the trailer window, just in case I couldn't sleep and wanted to look outside. I fell asleep pretty quickly, though. That being the last day of school and all, it was pretty exhausting. I remember waking up maybe hours later, it still being pitch black outside. It wasn't weird for me to wake up late in the night, since I always have had sleeping issues. I rolled onto my side trying to fall back asleep until I heard, Sugar Booger. My eyes immediately shot open as I heard my nickname being spoken, but I knew it wasn't either of my grandparents. They were both asleep and never were known to sleep talk before. I started to feel this horrible feeling in my gut, like whatever I was hearing wanted to really hurt me. Even at the age of 6, I knew this wasn't normal. Then I started to hear tapping at the trailer window. It was soft, but loud enough for me to hear it. Tap, tap, tap. I just sat there, frozen in fear. I was trying to just brush it off as tree branches or rain, but I just knew that wasn't it. I could tell that it was really someone, or something, tapping on the window. Then I decided to be brave and look. Big mistake. I pulled the curtain away to only peek, and all I saw were these large, yellow eyes. They seemed glassy, yet not entirely real. They looked like giant teddy bear eyes, but cold and unwelcoming. I remember in that moment I panicked and quickly closed the curtain back up. I then hid under the blanket, that being the only thing I knew to do when I saw a monster. I could feel tears falling down my face. I never had been so terrified in my life. I just curled up into my Gammy's side and clung to her all night long, that damn tapping only getting louder and more persistent throughout the night. I don't remember falling asleep, but somehow I did. I do remember my Gampy waking me up around noon, saying how if I got up quick enough, we could still go fishing. I honestly didn't want to leave the trailer at all, terrified that whatever I saw the night before would be out there. I did eventually go outside, but I was constantly looking around, horrified that whatever saw me last night would get me. My Gammy immediately knew I was scared and pulled me into a hug when she saw me, asking what was wrong. I did tell her what I saw and heard, and surprisingly, she believed me. The next thing I knew, she was telling my Gampy that we were moving campsites. It took a bit to convince him, but he did eventually start to pack up and hook the trailer onto his truck. I was put into the truck so I could properly sleep, but I just couldn't. I kept feeling that I was being watched, thinking that every little noise was that thing I saw, that if I closed my eyes even for a second, it would get me. My Gammy wasn't too far from me when I heard it again, but this time, it was my actual name. Aaliyah! In that moment, I had never seen my Gammy move so fast. She looked up into the bushes where we heard it, then to me. She then got in the truck with me and pulled me into a tight, protective hug. I began to cry all over again, telling her how I wanted to just go back home. That's when my Gampy got into the truck as well. And since I was sobbing so hard to the point I was coughing, he agreed we could go home. We started to head out of the campsite, still hurt that this trip had been ruined by something. But I still didn't know what. That's when something in my head told me to look back. I slowly did so, feeling an ice-cold fear wash over me as I saw something. A red fox, sitting in the middle of the campsite, sitting there with large yellow eyes. The same red fox from my dream, somehow, curling its lips into an eerie smile. After that encounter, we never did go back to that campsite. We did continue to camp, but in more populated areas. I didn't tell my grandma what I saw, but she had told me to trust my gut. She knew that I was sensitive to certain entities, and that would help me if I trusted it. Now, this would be the end of the story, but I'm afraid it isn't. There was one more encounter I had with the creature, and it was much more terrifying than the first time. The second encounter I had was when I was 17, many years later. By this time, I knew very well what a skinwalker was now, and I was still very paranoid every time I went near wooded areas. I still worried about seeing that fox, but I never really thought about it too much. Me and my two younger siblings were staying at a relative's house for Christmas, them living way up into a mountain area. I think they were my great aunt and uncle, but I'm not sure. Where they lived, there was no service at all, so unless we hooked up onto their Wi-Fi, we had no phones. I didn't mind the house, still loving the woods no matter what happened. Although at night I hated how they didn't close the window curtains, making it easy to anything outside to see inside. But I did feel safe while inside the house, knowing that they wouldn't let anything hurt us kids. Luckily, it didn't snow where they lived, so we could go outside and run around. They also had this beautiful black lab, being about a year old, named Pam. She was very playful and normally wouldn't listen to anyone but my uncle. Although she was easily excitable, she was a good puppy. One of the days we were there, my little sister and our aunt went out to the store for a nice girls' day. Although I'm a girl, I wanted to go hiking with my uncle and my little brother. We left pretty early since the hike we were doing was 4 hours of walking into town. It was a really chilly morning, but since we were doing so much walking, it felt great. We also decided to take Pam, it being a good way for her to get exercise and have fun, About maybe an hour into our walk, I started to slow down a bit, wanting to enjoy the beautiful forest. It was so peaceful. I could have honestly stayed there. But as we continued to walk, I started to feel something odd. I noticed how quiet the forest had suddenly become, hearing only our footsteps and my brother talking to our uncle. Pam noticed it too, her ears going straight up and growling softly. I started to pick up my pace to get next to my brother, worried that possibly a coyote or mountain lion was nearby. I knew, though, that they wouldn't be out at this time, though. Even if they were, they didn't walk near the roads. My little brother was only 9 at that time, and being the oldest sibling, my natural instincts to protect him kicked in. My uncle noticed the silence as well, telling us to stay close to him and Pam, who was now next to me and still growling. I began to feel that horrible feeling again, that ice-cold fear I once felt when I was 6. I tried so hard to not think of the creature, but it was all I could worry about. I was scared. I felt like I was back to being that scared little 6-year-old girl again. I had to stop for a moment, though. Seeing my shoelace came undone. I quickly kneeled down to tie it back up, trying to hurry and just get out of there. That's when I heard it. Aaliyah. In that moment, my heart dropped into my stomach. My eyes were widened, and I could just feel myself start to shake from fear. It was right next to me. I heard it clear as day. I slowly turned my head, and there it was. That same red fox, still having those horrid yellow eyes, and that same demented smile. Only this time I saw it much more clearly. Its fur looked so matted and disgusting. The smell it had was like rotten, decaying flesh mixed with garbage. Its limbs were much too long for a normal fox, the back legs bending completely the wrong way. Those eyes were still the worst thing about it, but now they looked emptier than I had remembered. I wanted to scream, to run, to cry, but I just couldn't. I was frozen as I was, too scared to even blink. Then I heard it speak again. This time, however, it had mimicked my little brother's voice. Found you. Before anything else could happen, Pam suddenly jumped in front of me and started to bark like mad, snapping and growling so aggressively that it scared me out of my frozen trance. When I looked back, it was gone. I used that moment to run over to my brother and uncle, who didn't see what I saw as they were too far ahead now. But I heard my uncle start to pray and sing a song under his breath, keeping my brother and myself close to him. I was just too scared to even look back. So I just kept my eyes on the ground and refused to stop walking. Pam had stopped barking, but she was still loudly growling and never left my side as we continued our hike. My little brother was a bit worried, but he just thought it was a coyote. When we finally made it into town, my uncle had called our aunt and told her to pick us up, saying something about how it wasn't safe for us to walk back. Thankfully, she did come and get us, but she was confused since we talked about that hike for days. On the car ride back, Pam never left me alone. She was right with me the entire time. She knew that thing was after me, and she protected me. I was very grateful that she was with us. Who knows what would have happened if she wasn't. When we got back to the house, I was talked to by my uncle and aunt. Once I told them what happened and what I saw, they had started to pray and check that all the locks were shut tight, my aunt putting something around the doors. I now believe it was probably ashes, but I never did find out. Unfortunately, this made our Christmas vacation cut short, as they were worried that I was not safe while still in the woods. We had to be taken home the next day, them making an excuse of how there was an emergency with a friend and that they had to help them out. I felt horrible that this Christmas was ruined, But once I did leave the woods, I truly felt safe again. Before they had to drive back home, though, they told me that it wasn't my fault, and that luckily, it didn't hurt me or the other kids. It did make me feel a bit better, but it still brought up a lot of questions and worries. It was still around. How? Why? What did it want with me? Does it want my skin? My soul? Was I just going to be tormented by this thing forever? I still don't have answers to these questions, and that's what really scares me. Now, I've moved from California and now live in Kentucky. I do live in woods, but so far that thing hasn't found me. I know that seems very stupid on my part, but life had changed a lot when I was growing up. I was given no other option to live somewhere else, and my grandpa in Kentucky was kind enough to let me live with him. So please don't call me an idiot for moving to the woods when I had no other choice. Anyways, while I am happy it hasn't found me, I'm still worried. Can it still find me? Is it still hunting me? I'm not close to anyone who knows truly on how to get rid of this thing, and that's why I'm telling my story now so I can possibly find help. So please, if there's anyone out there who does know, help me. I was in prison for 15 years. There was a skinwalker in there with us. A little background first. I was serving a 15-year sentence in a penitentiary in southern Arizona. What I was in there for isn't important. During my stay there were countless things that happened that no one could explain, and even more that no one wanted to know more about. It all started with a prison legend. Supposedly, years ago, something awful and unexplainable happened in the prison. Every morning, we'd be woken up and expected to stand near the front of our cells while guards visually confirmed we were present and accounted for. Apparently, about a year before I got sent there, the most brutal and unexplainable thing happened during one of these routines. A man who had a cell to himself looked very off during this check. When a guard pulled over another guard to help him check it out, they found it wasn't actually the prisoner they were expecting at all. It was a totally different man. This man was wearing the skin of the other man over him. Loosely fitting, draped over him, apparently looked like a real monster. The scariest things were, though, was the guy wearing the skin was not an inmate. They had no idea how he even got into prison, let alone a cell. What's worse is that they couldn't even figure out who the hell he was. He wasn't documented anywhere. And what's worse than that? They never even found the body of the man of the skin he was wearing. Pretty grisly stuff, I know. And I realize that's not the go-to definition of a skinwalker, but that's what the prison called him. The Skinwalker. Didn't help that the guy never talked, apparently. Anyway, that's what started the whole skinwalker superstition around the yard. Apparently, the guy got shipped to a different spot about a month after it happened, and just about everyone in Gen Pop felt all the better for it. I heard about the story on the second day of my stay. Hell of a story to hear to place in your home for the foreseeable future. Now on to the real shit, though. Sure, that guy was the skinwalker, but all he did in the long run was get an old lifer Navajo inmate to tell everyone about actual skinwalkers. It seemed like a lot of the prison culture actually revolved around them. Now, apparently, skinwalkers are tricky to point out on the spot, but if you manage to survive around one for more than a minute or two, almost everyone can tell the mannerisms are all off. They can mimic human speech, but not replicate it. They twitch manically. They have an unnatural gait while walking, but apparently they got better with experience. The old Navajo guy, his name was Carl, said that he was sure there was an actual one among the prisoners. Slowly picking us off over the years. He called it the Grand Master Skinwalker at one point. Apparently, he thought it had human mannerisms down so well that you might not even be able to tell if it was your cellmate. For a day or two. It had to be good, he posited one night. He would expect a skinwalker to jump at any opportunity for a kill. But this one realized it had a revolving door of people to kill coming to it, and masterfully bided its time, as Carl thought, for years. A lot of guys found humor in it. A lot more were really on edge about it. Every once in a while in prison, people snap. Sometimes you'll find your cellmate swinging in front of your bunk, strung up around the neck by his pant leg. Sometimes you just can't take it anymore. But in our yard, people tended to snap in a very special way. It wouldn't be an outburst at dinner or a silent suicide in the night. Guys would just stop talking, hunch over and shuffle around. Any friendships they had would be mostly out the window. They would turn into a loner during rec time. They would let their hair hang in front if their face. No one liked to talk about it. Like if they did, it would happen to them next. I felt the same way. I didn't know if it was a skinwalker or just people going crazy, but I didn't want to find out. It wasn't clockwork or anything, but every time someone snapped in this way, it wasn't more than a couple weeks before they were shipped off or transferred to God knows where without anyone else knowing beforehand. Then there was the nighttime occurrences. Short, loud bursts of sound echoed through my cell block during all hours of the night on a regular basis. It sounded like a mix between a pig's dying squeals and nails on a chalkboard. Just another thing no one liked to talk about? Even scarier were the shadows and footsteps. The block was dimly illuminated in the night by a few lights hanging from the ceiling outside the cells. I myself saw shadows flit across my walls on a regular occasion, when there were definitely no guards near my cell. One time near the end of my sentence, I woke up, looked at my back wall, and found a perfect silhouette of a person standing there. But when I looked, my bunkmate was asleep, and no one was outside my cell. And the footsteps. Everyone hated the fucking footsteps. They were the scariest part. In the night sometimes, more rarely than the shadows, you would hear ungodly fast footsteps. They sounded like wet feet slapping on tile floor. Whatever caused them would fly from one end of the block to the other in a dead sprint. Whatever it was inhumanely fast. If you happened to be awake before it started, by the time you heard the footsteps on one side of your cell and whipped your head around to see the thing run by, it sounded like it was 3 cells past you. Everyone hated the footsteps. I agreed. I thought they were the worst. I was released from that place about a month ago, and I have more stories than I can count. I swear, it was nearly my turn. About a week before I was discharged, my cellmate and a good friend of mine snapped. In the same kind of way. I didn't sleep for an entire week. Well, I did sleep, of course, but never for more than a few minutes at a time. Never turned my back on the guy. The scariest thing? I woke up one night to him somehow snaking his body through the bars of our cell. For reference, I couldn't get anything past my shoulder through them. The worst part, though, he was coming back into our cell. On the day of my release, I didn't say a word to him, just left. He seemed fine with it, so was I. I had made it through. 15 years of prison fights, gang disputes, and for all I know, skinwalker abductions. I left through the front gates, a free man. As I walked along the fence for the rec yard, I spotted my cellmate, standing off on his own, like he had for the last week or so. I shook my head, not even really sure if it was him anymore. I took one last look over the yard, this time from the other side of the fence. I wish I hadn't. There, standing off on his own, on the other side of the yard, was Carl, slouched over, eyeing the other inmates and twitching manically. My wife heard a skinwalker in our house last night. Let me start off by saying that my wife doesn't believe in paranormal entities or anything of that nature. We have 3 cats, and one of them likes to be a rebel, jumping onto counters and meowing at the top of his lungs, just looking for attention. He does this throughout the night, and it's a regular occurrence. Last night, after a few beers and video games, I decided it was time to head to bed with my wife. When I woke up this morning, my wife was basically attached to me with wide eyes and a nervous look on her face. I asked her what was wrong, and she proceeded to tell me what happened last night. She said that around 2:50 in the morning, she was woken up to a noise that sounded like one of our cats downstairs meowing unusually loud. After giving herself a few seconds to perk up and fully pay attention, she said that the meows sounded more like a person trying to mimic a cat, and it kept saying, hello. After meowing for 2 to 3 minutes, a loud bang came at our door, and then a notification went off for a motion sensor at our front door. When she told me this, I checked my phone, and sure enough, there was a notification for motion detected at 2:52 a.m. I asked her why she didn't wake me up so I could grab my gun. She said she was frozen with fear and didn't want it to hear her make a noise. We're out running errands while I'm typing this, but something made me uncomfortable about her story. Last night, I set the home security alarm around 9 p.m., and we didn't turn it off till we walked the dog this morning. To make things worse, we had slept with all the animals in the room, and the door was closed. So, whatever was in our house or outside the front door was not one of our animals. Obviously, the first thing that came to my mind was a skinwalker, but maybe I'm just being paranoid. I checked all the rooms in the house after I got up. I'm not sure what I could have done anyways. It's very odd that my wife was scared so badly by something she doesn't necessarily believe in. We bought this house brand new, so no one has lived here before. When I'm home alone, I do feel like I'm being watched, or someone's always walking directly behind me. My wife also said that the house has given her chills since we moved in. Something is just off about it. We just got home, and I went to hang up one of my shirts in the master bedroom closet when I noticed that the board that covers the attic access has been shifted a little. When I asked my wife about it, she said she's never been up there, and the builders would have placed it back in its original place before we made the purchase. I'm genuinely getting anxious just thinking about what could be going on. Has anyone had an experience like this? Or similar, at least? We're going to my mother-in-law's to get some sage. My wife said burning it should keep whatever's around our house away. I think I met a skinwalker. Growing up in Arizona, myths and legends are a part of life. Native traditions, mystic places, vortexes, UFO abductions, and dozens of other stories of the unknown that I always found fascinating. I grew up spending a lot of time wandering around the desert and the mountains, hunting, camping, etc. So I felt very at home in the wilderness. One late spring day on one of my many hiking adventures, I wandered off trail and after several hours came upon a small group of old mud adobe houses. A few people heard me coming and came out of the houses to investigate, and after apparently making the collective decision that I was not a threat, one of the elders dressed in old-style traditional native clothing and a headdress came over to greet me. The man spoke slowly and told me that I had wandered onto a Navajo reservation and asked me if I was lost or if I needed help. When I told him no, I was lost. But intentionally, he chuckled and invited me in to eat with his family. The next several hours were one of the great experiences of my life. The whole thing was like being thrown back in time. While we ate and talked, others from the surrounding houses began coming over to join us, and I got the feeling they didn't get many outside visitors. We shared stories for hours about life, family, their history in the area, and time spent in the wild. And the longer we talked, the more they opened up, and the more interesting the elders' stories got. Throughout the time, There was one man who never spoke. He just sat out of the circle, listening and watching me. At one point, I told them I did what I called my walkabouts every year around September, where I would go out by myself into the wilderness for 2 to 4 weeks at a time, and this got the attention of the one silent old man. When I finished, he came over to the circle around the fire, sat directly on the ground in front of me, and asked me to join him on the ground. He told me that years ago he used to do the same thing, and went on to tell me about the canyon he went to. He described it as a dangerous but magic place, and that I would see the world differently if I came back. If must be for dramatic effect. When he finished, he invited me over to his home. The house was small, and through an open door in the back room, I could see it was filled with various animal pelts, coyotes, and wolves mostly. He walked over and closed that door, then picked up and handed me an old map and some written directions that seemed like he had been holding on to them for a long time, and just walked away into that back room and closed the door behind him. It was late, and one of the families had invited me to stay the night, which I gladly did. The next morning, as I prepared to leave, one of the old women came over to me with something in her hands, handed me a talisman, and simply said, "Dip your bullets in the white ash at the hottest part of the fire." Then just walked away. September came, and as I packed for my walkabout, I saw the talisman in a drawer, and something felt right about taking it with me. After a beautiful drive, I was very happy to find the Forest Service road marked on the old map. The entrance to the area was remote and overgrown and tough to get to even in my Jeep, and took me much longer to get to than expected, so I decided to make camp and start the hike in the morning. After a few hours on a trail that looked like it had been forgotten, I came to a stream and the entrance to the secret valley. It was a narrow crack in the tall cliffs, with about 4 feet of water running gently through, but too narrow for a kayak or canoe. I hoisted my gear over my head and began the wade sideways through the chest-deep water. The crack in the cliff seemed to go on forever, but after almost 2 hours, I came to the place where it opened up into a small lake in an incredible valley surrounded by tall rock faces. This may have been the most remote place I have ever been, in the sense that there was no sign that people had ever been there. No trash, no bullet casings, not even the evidence of campfires. My first night there was the quietest night I have ever spent in the wild. No birds, no frogs, not even crickets, but I didn't feel like I was alone there. In the morning, after breakfast, I headed out on my first exploratory hike to explore my new home for the next couple weeks. After being stalked by a mountain lion on a hike about 10 years ago, I make a point of now bringing a pistol with me when I'm out wilderness hiking. After some looking around, I found a narrow path that appeared to be a game trail that lead up the side of one of the cliffs and towards what looked like caves from the canyon floor. I made my way up to them and came upon an entrance that was much larger than it appeared from below. I made some noise to alert any possible animals I was there, and made my way inside. The cave was an expansive single chamber that went back a couple 100 feet. As I walked, I inspected as much as I could see with my light, but there was no tracks of any kind in the dirt, besides mine. So I decided I was alone in there and pushed on towards the rear of the cave. As I came around the last bend in the cave and approached the end, my headlamp panned across a large pile of bones, some animal, some human, and a very old-looking small candle sitting on a natural stone shelf. This is the first thing that has scared me in as long as I can remember. But focusing my wits I remembered that there was no other tracks in the cave and figured it was all from a long time ago. I was still a little uneasy as I exited the cave and was ready to get back to camp. As I came out into the light, about 75 feet away, there was the largest wolf I have ever seen that looked like it was coming down from standing on its hind legs. It dropped down to all fours on a rock, just began staring at me, not growling or baring its teeth, just staring. I pulled my .45 and fired 2 shots to the side of it to scare it away, but it didn't even flinch. Not only have I never seen a wolf in this part of northern Arizona, but I have never seen a wild animal that did not at least flinch at the sound of a gunshot. We both stood there, staring at each other for a moment. I turned and set my backpack down to grab my binoculars and get a little closer look. But when I turned back, the wolf was gone. I made my way cautiously down the path, back towards camp. I have encountered wolves before, and usually it's not the one wolf you can see that should worry you. It's the ones you can't see. So I was extra cautious for the return trip. Back at camp, I made sure my gun was fully loaded and got my recurve bow strung just in case the wolves came back. I have seen plenty of predatory animals on my adventures. It's a part of being in the wilderness, so I wasn't too worried, just prepared myself the best I could and went over to the lake to go fishing. Within about 20 minutes, I caught 2 of the biggest brown trout I've ever caught, so I decided to stop fishing for the day and take a swim. Back at camp, I made a fire, cleaned my trout, and made dinner while the sun went down. As soon as the sun went down, all of the life in the canyon seemed to go silent again. As I put out my fire and prepared for bed, I noticed there was a small flicker of light coming from the area where the cave I had explored earlier up the cliffside, which didn't make sense. It was a moonless night, and stars don't reflect that way. It couldn't have been the candle I had seen. It was too old and would not have burned so bright. I decided to keep my gun close and try to get some sleep. I would investigate the cave again the next day. When I woke at sunrise, there was a haze along the ground throughout the whole canyon floor, but as the sun rose, it disappeared quickly, and the area came back to life. I made my breakfast, gathered my gun and bow, and headed back up toward the cave. When I reached the entrance, I saw there were still no tracks besides mine around the entrance, and decided to push up the hill further. Just a little further up, I came upon the entrance to another cave, much smaller than the first one. There was a small flat landing with a large, heavily twisted juniper tree that, to my absolute surprise, had many small objects hanging from thin, old-looking ropes tied to the branches. There were bones, but there were also old things definitely made by humans, and looked like they were old Native American artifacts. Thinking I might have found the spot where the old man I met on the reservation had stayed when he was there decades ago, I went into the cave. This cave was much different from the first one. Just a few feet in, I noticed the walls were covered in what looked like ceremonial cave paintings. As I pushed further back, the cave got dramatically colder, much colder than it should have been, and the walls were completely covered with the paintings the entire way. When I reached the back of the cave, I was not prepared for what I saw. There was what looked like an old altar made of wood and bones. As I looked around, I saw that a little before the back of the cave, there was another shaft in the ceiling that went up, and on a ledge about 25 feet up sat the small figure of what appeared to be a woman. She was small and pale, with her face painted white, and wearing something like a crown made of woven branches with 2 small antlers at the front. I stopped and stared for a few minutes, and the figure did not move. So I assumed that it was mummified remains from a long time ago. Not wanting to disturb a burial site, I turned to walk back out of the cave. But I began to walk. I heard what sounded like a faint voice in an unknown, ancient language. I instinctively looked back up towards the figure, but it was gone. I was immediately terrified and ran from the cave as fast as I could get out. But my headlamp flickered and died. I made my way out, feeling along the wall to find my way. And the whole way, I felt like there was something right behind me. When I saw the first light from the cave entrance, I began to sprint towards it. Just before I made it out, I looked back, and there was nothing. So I slowed down, but I could still hear the faint voice, and the volume never changed. When I got outside, all the bones and artifacts hanging from the tree were gone. I ran down the path as fast as I could, headed back to my campsite by the lake. Just as I reached the floor of the canyon, I noticed the large wolf at the tree line to my left, but this time, it stayed standing upright on its hind legs. I stopped running, hoping to not initiate its predatory response to chase me. And again, it just stood there staring at me. I reached my campsite safely and immediately began packing up. It was too late in the day to make it out before dark, and I did not want to make the hike out at night with all that was going on. I moved my tent so it would back up to the canyon wall by the crack in the cliffside, so I didn't have to worry about anything sneaking up behind me. I built my fire much larger and knew I wasn't going to get any sleep that night. Just as the sun was going down, I began to hear noises coming from the trees, and I felt like I was being hunted. Finally, in the last light of day, I saw the wolf slowly walking around by where the path led out of the trees, and it began to slowly walk towards me. This time I drew my gun and fired towards the creature, intending to hit it, and while I saw a couple hit the dirt around it, several bullets hit it. Several rounds from a .45 will at least slow down anything I've ever encountered. But this giant wolf kept walking towards me like nothing had happened. I continued to fire at it until the inevitable click of an empty magazine. I reached down and fumbled around in my backpack, looking for my other magazines to reload, and as I lifted it, the talisman the old woman gave me fell out onto the ground. I picked it up and put it around my neck, and immediately remembered what she had told me. Dip your bullets in the white ash. I looked around but didn't see my backup magazines, so I grabbed my bow, pulled an arrow that was tipped with a hunting broadhead, and dipped it into the white ashes, drew, and fired. I hit the creature just in front of its right hip, and it let out a noise somewhere between a growl and a person screaming that made my blood curdle. I can hear that noise in my head to this day. It immediately turned and ran back to the trees, and in the flicker of the firelight, I saw the small women with the antler crowns standing there waiting for it. They both retreated into the trees, and for the rest of the night, I could hear the same faint voice I had heard in the cave. I spent the night outside of my tent, as awake as I have ever been, but no longer afraid, and at dawn finished packing up so I could get out of that canyon. The next spring, I went back to the small group of houses on the Navajo reservation I had found the year before. I was wearing the talisman as a necklace, and the first person to greet me was the woman who had given it to me, and she ran up to give me a big hug. "You heard me," was all she said. I asked the group about the man who had given me the map, as I was almost desperate to talk to him about the experience I had, so I could compare it to his own. They told me that he had disappeared shortly after I had visited them the first time and had not been back. Strangely, when I tried to tell them what had happened to me, no one would let me tell the story. And the oldest man there, who sat in the corner, kept mumbling the words, "Ye nald lushi." We all once again sat and shared other stories of life and a meal. Before I left the next morning, I found the old woman who had given me the talisman and offered it back to her. She smiled and told me I had a good heart, then just closed my hands around it, telling me to keep it to watch over my next walkabout. I went back to that small village on the reservation several times over the next 10 years or so, till I moved to Oregon. But they never let me tell them what happened. I never went back to the canyon, and while curiosity sometimes gets the best of me, I don't think I ever will. Don't tell Skinwalker stories around the campfire. I was camping in Arizona with my cousin. We'd built a fire, then got some marshmallows out to make some s'mores. It was a warm night, but we were having a good time. I hadn't gone camping with my cousin in years, since we were teenagers. I blew the flame out on my marshmallow and crushed it between 2 graham crackers and chocolate. "Do you want to hear a scary story?" my cousin asked with a sly grin on his face. When we were younger, he used to always tell scary stories around the fire. I couldn't help but get excited. "Let's see if you still got it," I said with my own grin. "Have you ever heard of a skinwalker?" he asked, popping a marshmallow in his mouth. "Yeah. Isn't it a native legend? Something about turning into a coyote?" "Yes. A skinwalker is a Navajo witch that wears the skins of animals and can turn into any animal they want." He leans in closer, so the fire illuminates his face. "What's so scary about that?" I ask. "You don't want to run into one of them. Trust me, I have." I say nothing, waiting for him to continue with the story. "I was visiting my friend on the res one day the summer after graduation. We were hanging out on the porch, talking about what we were going to do now that school was over. Just wasting the night away, you know. Then I noticed a coyote just wandering around a few yards away. Now in this neighborhood, there weren't any fences dividing the yards, so I could see it walk from yard to yard. I nudged my friend and nodded over to it. We got quiet and just watched it. Then it stood up on 2 feet. It was pressed up against a house in the shadows and just scooted along on 2 feet like a human. I was so shocked. I didn't think coyotes could do that. My friend whispered to me, "That's no coyote." I asked him what he meant. That's a skinwalker. Now he had mentioned skinwalkers to me before, but I thought it was just a legend, and that he surely didn't believe some old story his parents told him to scare him from playing in the woods at night. Once it was next to a garbage can, it hopped on top of it, then leaped up, grabbing onto the window ledge. The window was open. Fear filled my body as I realized 2 things. No coyote could do that. And whoever was in that room was about to have a very bad night. Then we heard the guy in that room screaming. Then his screams were drowned out by a scream that was somewhat of a mix of animal and human. We fell out of our chairs, scrambling to get inside. We locked all the doors and windows and hid. That was the scariest night of my life. I don't remember if cops showed up to that house. We were too scared to leave the room and check. But it's a night I'll never forget. Goosebumps cover my arms. Now that was a good story. I didn't believe him about it being true, but it was a good story, nonetheless. "Looks like you still got it." That was good. Got me being scared to investigate the trees. I laughed nervously, looking behind me at the forest that seems just a little scarier now. "Hey, every word of that is true. I didn't make this one up. No need to make up a scary story when you've lived it." He has a pleased look on his face, nonetheless. We sat in silence for a bit, and I thought about the story he just told. For some reason, a coyote creeping around on 2 legs just seems comical. I laughed to myself. Maybe it would be creepier in person. After another 30 minutes, the fire dies down, and we crawl into our tent. All thoughts of skinwalkers had left our heads. I was drifting off to sleep when a stick snapping outside our tent woke me up. My face was facing the wall of the tent, and I don't think I'd quite registered what woke me up. After a few seconds, I closed my eyes and prepared to go back to sleep. Then I heard my cousin outside the tent calling my name. I opened my eyes. I assumed my cousin had stepped outside for some reason, but I didn't know what he would need me for out there. I didn't quite want to leave my sleeping bag, so I was just going to pretend like I didn't hear him. I closed my eyes again. Then I heard him call me again. Annoyed, I sat up to leave the tent. That's when I noticed my cousin, right next to me, asleep. I knew I heard him call me from outside the tent. I heard it twice. There was no mistake. I shook him awake. "What do you want?" he asked groggily, not opening his eyes. "I heard your voice outside the tent calling my name. Am I going crazy?" He opens his eyes, a panicked look in his eyes. "You're sure? My voice?" he asks. "Yeah, twice. There was no mistaking it." He pulls me down to the ground next to him. We hear some shuffling outside the tent. I start to freak out a little. "That's a skinwalker. They can imitate voices. That's how they draw you in," he whispers. "A skinwalker? Are you sure? What's the odds of a skinwalker showing up the same night you tell me the story?" "Don't mess with me," I whisper back. "Talking about a skinwalker at night can draw it to you. I didn't think about that when I told the story. Just stay quiet and stay down, and hopefully it will leave." The sound of another stick snapping didn't help at all. After a few long, frightful hours of laying their eyes wide open, it seemed to go away. Eventually, I fell asleep, I guess. I don't remember falling asleep, and don't know how I could. My cousin was already packing everything up by the time I crawled out of the tent. "I know we planned for 2 more nights, but we're getting out of here right now." "Yeah, I'm with you on that," I spoke. Now I can't say for sure it was a skinwalker that night, but I can say I definitely heard my cousin calling my name from outside the tent when he was sleeping right next to me, and that was by far the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. So take my advice and save the Skinwalker stories for when you're safe in the comforts of home and not for the campfire.